They sailed with the unwavering confidence of an empire that believed it could conquer anything, even the frozen wastes of the Arctic. They sailed with two of the most advanced ships ever built, provisioned for years, captained by a celebrated veteran. And then they simply ceased to exist. Not one man returned, not one ship. Just a chilling, baffling silence that would grip the world for over a decade and launch one of history's most extensive and ultimately futile search efforts. We are talking, of course, about the Franklin expedition, a tale so steeped in hubris, mystery, and unimaginable suffering that it continues to haunt the annals of exploration. To understand the magnitude of this disaster, we must first transport ourselves back to the mid-19th century. This was the age of steam and steel, of Queen Victoria's booming empire, an era when British ambition knew no bounds. From the sun-baked plains of India to the icy reaches of the polar north, the Union Jack was a ubiquitous symbol of dominion. And nowhere was this spirit of conquest more keenly felt than in the relentless, generations-long pursuit of the Northwest Passage. This elusive sea route, theoretically connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the labyrinthine archipelago of Arctic Canada, promised not just commercial advantage, but immense national prestige. Finding it would be the ultimate triumph, a final geographical puzzle piece snapped into place by British ingenuity and grit. By 1845, after centuries of failed attempts, the passage remained unconquered, a stubborn testament to the Arctic's brutal indifference. But the British Admiralty, fueled by advances in shipbuilding and navigation, believed they were on the cusp of victory. They needed a leader, someone with experience, gravitas, and an unshakable will. Their choice? Sir John Franklin. Now, Franklin was a complex figure. At 59 years old, he was past his physical prime for such an arduous undertaking, yet his reputation preceded him. A veteran of Trafalgar and New Orleans, he had already cut his teeth on two grueling overland expeditions to the Canadian Arctic in the 1820s, mapping vast stretches of coastline. These journeys, while pioneering, were also notorious for the extreme hardship and starvation endured by his crew. He earned the grim moniker "the man who ate his boots" after his men were reduced to cannibalism and boiling leather for sustenance. Despite these near-fatal experiences, or perhaps because of them, Franklin harbored an intense desire to conquer the passage once and for all. He saw this as his last great chance for glory, to cement his legacy not as a survivor of disaster, but as the discoverer of one of the world's greatest geographical prizes. He was, to put it mildly, eager. For this grand finale, the Admiralty spared no expense. They commissioned two ships that were by any measure marvels of naval engineering, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. These were not your typical wooden sailing vessels. Both had seen previous service in Antarctic exploration, proving their mettle against ice. But for the Franklin expedition, they were retrofitted and reinforced to an unprecedented degree. Their bows were sheathed in iron plates, designed to smash through ice rather than merely withstand it. Their hulls were fortified with extra layers of timber, making them immensely strong. Most significantly, they were equipped with auxiliary steam engines, salvaged from railway locomotives. These engines, capable of propelling the ships at a modest 4 knots, were a revolutionary addition, offering unprecedented maneuverability and power in calm or ice-choked waters where sails would be useless. The ships also featured heated cabins, a library, and astonishingly a sophisticated system for distilling fresh water from ice and steam. They were in essence floating fortresses of cutting-edge technology, brimming with the confidence of an imperial power at its peak. The provisions loaded on Erebus and Terror were equally impressive. Food for 3 years, enough canned meat, vegetables, and preserved luxuries to sustain 129 men, including the officers and scientists, through multiple Arctic winters. This was no rough-and-ready scouting mission. This was a fully equipped, self-sufficient mobile outpost, capable of prolonged isolation. The crew itself was a carefully selected group: experienced Arctic hands, skilled navigators, scientists, and Royal Marines, all volunteers, all bursting with enthusiasm for the adventure. They were trained for every conceivable challenge, confident in their ships, their leader, and their nation's technological prowess. This was to be the defining expedition of its age, a triumphant march through the last great unknown. Failure simply wasn't an option. The departure on May 19, 1845 was a grand spectacle. Thousands lined the banks of the River Thames to cheer the ships as they sailed from Greenhithe, their flags snapping in the wind, their brass polished to a blinding sheen. The public was gripped by Arctic fever, fed by newspaper accounts of the bravery and scientific ambition of the expedition. There were banquets, toasts, and heartfelt goodbyes. No one could have imagined that these farewells would be permanent, that this celebrated send-off was in fact the procession to a colossal frozen tomb. The Erebus and Terror sailed smoothly north, crossing the Atlantic. They stopped briefly in the Orkney Islands to take on additional provisions, then proceeded to Greenland. Here, at the Whalefish Islands in Disco Bay, they met with 2 supply ships, Beretta Jr. and Punts of Wales, which delivered fresh meat and final letters from home.
The last official contact with the expedition occurred on July 28, 1845, when Captain Dannett of the Prince of Wales sent a boat across to the Erebus. The crew appeared in high spirits, the ships ready, the men healthy and eager. Franklin sent back dispatches, confident notes about their progress and future plans. Then, at the very end of July, Erebus and Terror were sighted for the last time by whaling vessels entering Baffin Bay. They were waiting for an opportune moment to cross the ice into Lancaster Sound, the supposed gateway to the passage. The whalers saw the ships, majestic and resolute, silhouetted against the vast and different expanse of the Arctic. And then they sailed into the silence, a silence that would stretch on for years, growing colder and heavier with each passing season, until the world finally realized that Sir John Franklin and his 128 men had not simply found the Northwest Passage, they had been swallowed by it.
The silence, initially, was not perceived as ominous. Arctic expeditions were expected to be out of communication for extended periods. A successful passage, it was hoped, would be announced upon their triumphant return through the Bering Strait, or perhaps after a wintering in the Arctic and a return journey the following year. But as 1846 turned into 1847 and no word arrived, a subtle unease began to stir in London. That unease ripened into genuine concern by late 1847, and by 1848, public anxiety had reached a fever pitch. Lady Franklin, Sir John's determined wife, began to lobby the Admiralty relentlessly, unwilling to accept her husband's fate. What had transpired in that vast, indifferent expanse? What we now piece together from scattered evidence, from Inuit testimony, and from the grim discoveries of later search expeditions paints a chilling picture of an expedition initially confident, then slowly, inexorably, ground down by the unforgiving Arctic. After sailing into Lancaster Sound, Erebus and Terror pushed westward, navigating through Barrow Strait. Instead of following the better-known routes further north, Franklin made the fateful decision to turn south down Peel Sound. This passage, then uncharted, seemed to offer a direct route southwest towards the known parts of the passage. It was a bold, perhaps reckless gamble. For a brief period, it paid off. The ships progressed remarkably well, considering the dense, multi-year ice that often choked these waterways. Their first winter, 1845-1846, was spent securely anchored off the northeast coast of Beechey Island, a small landmass off Devon Island, just at the entrance to Wellington Channel. This location, later discovered and excavated by search parties in 1850-51, provided the first concrete clues to the expedition's movements. Here, the men constructed a magnetic observatory, a workshop, and left behind an enormous quantity of supplies, boots, provisions, medical supplies, suggesting a deliberate attempt to lighten the ships for the next season, perhaps also indicating they felt well provisioned enough to spare the excess. Crucially, 3 graves were found, belonging to John Torrington, John Hartnell, and William Brain, all young seamen who had died during that first winter. The causes of death were not immediately clear, but later forensic analysis of their exhumed remains revealed high levels of lead in their bones, a grim precursor of what was to come. For now, however, in the winter of 1845-46, the mood was likely one of measured success. They had navigated a significant portion of the Arctic, wintered safely, and were ready to continue their push. With the thaw of 1846, Franklin and his men resumed their voyage, venturing further south into Peel Sound. They navigated the intricate channels around King William Island, entering an area notorious for its heavy, persistent ice. This was a critical juncture. The passage, which Franklin had dreamed of conquering, was now within tantalizing reach, yet its very proximity proved to be their undoing. In September 1846, just as the Arctic began to freeze solid for its long, dark winter, Erebus and Terror became trapped, not lightly but irrevocably. The colossal ships, built to withstand the pressure of ice, were now held fast, crushed within the frozen grip of the sea just off the northwest coast of King William Island. The exact location, as we now understand, was approximately 70 degrees 05 north, 98 degrees 23 west, a place of profound isolation, hundreds of miles from any known human habitation. The second winter, 1846-1847, was a descent into a slow, agonizing hell. Unlike the relative comfort of Beechey Island, this entrapment offered no respite. The ships were locked in an endless, featureless expanse of ice, unable to move. Supplies, while initially abundant, were designed for a maximum of 3 years, and the harsh realities of the Arctic were rapidly accelerating their depletion. The most insidious enemy, however, was not starvation, not yet. It was disease. Scurvy, an old adversary of long voyages, began to take its toll, weakening men already suffering from the lack of fresh food and sunlight. But the lead poisoning stemming from the poorly soldered tin cans of their preserved provisions was far more insidious, attacking their nervous systems, causing debilitating weakness, cognitive impairment, and a profound sense of despair. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, and other opportunistic infections further decimated the crew. The meticulous records kept aboard, which would have offered invaluable insights, were lost to the ice. Our understanding of this grim period comes primarily from a single, laconic yet horrifying document, the Victory Point Record. This document, found years later by a search expedition, was discovered in a cairn on Victory Point, a prominent headland on King William Island.
It was a standard Admiralty form, initially dated May 28, 1847. At this point, the ships had been stuck for 8 months. The original message, penned by Lieutenant Graham Gore, stated that the ships Erebus and Terror had wintered in the ice in latitude 70 degrees 05 north and longitude 98 degrees 23 west, having ascended Peel Sound. It confirmed that all was well and that Sir John Franklin was in command. This was the initial, somewhat optimistic dispatch. However, scrawled around the margins of this original message in a different hand and dated April 25, 1848, was a chilling update. It stated that the ships had been beset in the ice since September 12, 1846, and that they were now being abandoned. It revealed that Sir John Franklin had died on June 11, 1847, nearly a year before the note was updated. 9 officers and 15 men had also perished. Captain Crozier, now in command, and Captain Fitzjames, with the remaining 105 men, were setting out from the ships on April 26, 1848, heading south towards the Back's Fish River, a faint hope of reaching civilization. The ships were being abandoned, but the men were not giving up. Not yet. This single piece of paper, a silent witness to a year of unimaginable suffering and loss, represents the last definitive communication from the Franklin expedition. It marks the moment when hope, however faint, gave way to a desperate gamble for survival. The ships, once symbols of ambition and technological prowess, were left to the mercies of the ice, silent hulks containing the memories of a year of suffering and the ghosts of the fallen. What followed next, as Captain Crozier and his remaining men began their desperate trek across the desolate landscape of King William Island, was an even greater tragedy, an epic of human endurance pushed beyond its breaking point, scattered across the frozen wastes. The silence had been broken, but only by a death knell.
On April 26, 1848, 105 souls, many already weakened by 2 years of scurvy, starvation, and lead poisoning, began their southward march. Their objective, the Back's Fish River, hundreds of miles away, a faint thread of hope leading to the Canadian mainland and, theoretically, eventual rescue. They hauled 2 heavy boats on sledges, along with provisions, personal effects, and scientific instruments, a testament to a desperate clinging to order amidst chaos. The weight was crushing, the ground uneven, often deep with snow or treacherous with ice. Each step was an immense effort, depleting already meager reserves. The initial days, perhaps weeks, saw a slow but inexorable decline. Men, already suffering from chronic scurvy, their gums bleeding, joints swollen, and bodies racked with pain, began to falter. Hypothermia, brought on by inadequate shelter and relentless cold, would have claimed many. Those too weak to continue were left behind, their last requests perhaps for a quick end or a final prayer. The Arctic, indifferent and unforgiving, began to reclaim its own. The neat lines of men pulling sledges would have dissolved into scattered, desperate individuals or small, struggling groups. The most chilling, yet crucial insights into their final months come not from official reports, but from the oral histories of the Netsilik Inuit. They spoke of seeing emaciated white men dragging boats south along the coast of King William Island, some collapsing and dying as they walked. They described finding bodies in campsites littered with European artifacts, cutlery, buttons, pieces of canvas. Critically, the Inuit witnessed men who were clearly starving, some reportedly engaging in practices of last resort to survive. These accounts, initially dismissed by British authorities as unreliable or exaggerated, have since been corroborated by archaeological findings, providing a grim, vivid picture of the expedition's final collapse. 11 years after the ships were abandoned, in May 1859, Captain Leopold McClintock, on one of the many search expeditions funded by Lady Franklin, made the most significant discoveries. On the west coast of King William Island, near Erebus Bay, his party came across a large boat mounted on a sledge. It contained 2 skeletons. One lay beneath a pile of clothes, suggesting an attempt at warmth or burial. The other was propped up, as if observing the desolate expanse. Inside the boat and scattered around it were a bewildering array of items: silk handkerchiefs, sponges, a small library of books, 2 shotguns loaded and cocked, a chronometer, and a disturbing quantity of personal effects: combs, brushes, small tools. This was not the gear of men planning a rapid, efficient retreat. Instead, it spoke of a chaotic, ill-conceived attempt to carry treasured, yet utterly impractical possessions across a barren land. The boat itself was pointed north, back towards the abandoned ships, suggesting a desperate, failed attempt to return for more supplies, or perhaps a final, futile gesture of despair. Further searches by McClintock's man yielded more grim discoveries. At a place later named Grave Point, they found another boat containing more skeletons and equipment. Along the coastline, and particularly around Starvation Cove, cairns were found containing scattered remains and fragments of clothing. The ground was littered with bones, some showing clear evidence of knife marks, a chilling indicator of cannibalism, a final, horrific resort for survival, driven by extreme desperation.
The forensic analysis of the remains recovered over the centuries painted a more detailed picture of their suffering. Studies of bone samples confirmed high levels of lead ingested from the poorly soldered tins of food. This would have contributed to neurological damage, disorientation, cognitive impairment, and a general weakening of the body, making them more susceptible to scurvy and hypothermia. Scurvy, left untreated for 2 years, would have crippled them, leaving them too weak to walk, with open wounds and internal bleeding. Starvation was the ultimate executioner, exaggerated by the relentless cold and the sheer physical exertion of their impossible march. The fate of Captain Crozier, the last surviving officer, and the remaining men remains largely unknown. Inuit accounts speak of seeing a party of about 30-40 men further south, near the mouth of the Back River, but these sightings dwindle. It is believed that Crozier and the last remnants of the expedition succumbed to the elements and starvation somewhere on the vast, unforgiving plains of King William Island, their bodies scattered, eventually absorbed by the land they had hoped to conquer. No grave of Crozier or any other senior officer has ever been definitively identified. The expedition simply vanished, piece by piece, into the icy silence. Yet, the story did not end there. The Franklin expedition continued to haunt the popular imagination, spurring further archaeological work and even modern scientific expeditions. The greatest revelations, however, came much later. In 2014, after decades of searching, and with critical input from Inuit oral testimony, Parks Canada divers located HMS Erebus, resting largely intact on the seabed in the waters of Wilmot and Crampton Bay, off King William Island. 2 years later, in 2016, a research team found HMS Terror, remarkably preserved within Terror Bay, 92 kilometers north of Erebus. The ships, silent sentinels for over 160 years, finally surrendered their secrets. Their discovery was a testament to the enduring mystery and a partial answer to the questions that had plagued generations. The story of the Franklin expedition is one of grand ambition, the hubris of empire, and the crushing power of nature. It's a narrative of human suffering pushed to its absolute limits, an epic of endurance, and a stark reminder that even the most technologically advanced endeavors can be humbled by the raw, untamed forces of the world. The silence of the Arctic may have been broken by occasional discovery, but the full, agonizing truth of those final days will forever remain etched in the ice, a testament to a doomed voyage and the men who sailed on it.